Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a Senior Associate Planner with Roadside in Harwell. But today I'm representing the Sustainable Communities Division of APA, and we are the hosts for today's webinar. The APA Sustainable Communities Division's mission is to support planners who are committed to planning for sustainable communities by integrating all aspects of sustainability into our work through the combined economic, social, and ecological factors that shape our communities. Today's webinar is co-hosted with EcoDistricts, and we'll talk more about the topic in just one second. But first, I want to acknowledge our division sponsors. Thank you to all these organizations who help us put on events such as this webinar. Our sponsors this year include Clarion, Dewberry, Farr Associates, Health, Niche Engineering, Robinson & Cole, Smith Group JJR, U.S. Green Building Council, CDP Engineers, Montgomery Associates, TESCA, and TransformativeTools.org. So thank you again to our sponsors. We're also currently discussing potential sponsors for the reception at the National Planning Conference in New Orleans. So if you're interested in division sponsorship or event sponsorship, please feel free to contact Meryl, whose email is listed here. Thank you to our sponsors and to all of our division members. We have another upcoming webinar later this month called Solar Planning and Zoning from the Rooftop to the Solar Farm. That's on February 27th. We also are excited to tell you about a training that we're doing with EcoDistricts at sort of a shoulder event to the planning conference in New Orleans. It's an all-day training, and it will sort of give you an overview of the EcoDistrict certified. They'll explore case studies, and you can learn about key issues and best practices influencing neighborhood sustainability. So that's on April 20th in New Orleans. So you can find out more about both of those events at sustainableplanning.net. We also have up here all of our division contact information, so feel free to get in touch if you have ideas for other events or webinars. We'd love to hear from you. Now to today's event. Our speaker for today is Naomi Cole. Naomi is the Director of Certification and Innovation for EcoDistricts. She leads EcoDistricts programs that advance the market for exemplary sustainable neighborhood projects and practitioners. She helped launch the precursor to the EcoDistricts protocol at the Portland Sustainability Institute, where she developed and piloted an EcoDistricts approach in Portland, Oregon, and began to expand it to other cities. She brings over a decade of experience in urban sustainability, including roles at CGF Architects and Clear Results. So today, Naomi will be giving us an overview of the EcoDistricts certification program and telling you about some standards that they have in place. Before we get started on the webinar, I just want to remind you all that you are able to submit questions in two ways, either via the chat box or using the built-in Q&A function. So we'll have a question portion at the end of the presentation, so don't hesitate to submit questions throughout. Also, I want to mention if you're having any trouble hearing or seeing the presentation, please try reopening the presentation in a new browser, in a different type of browser. But if you continue to have issues, just let me know via the chat box, and I'll work with you to get those addressed. And with that, I will pass it on to Naomi for our webinar.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Let's see if we can make this transition work. All right. Jenny, can you see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, success. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for having me join you today. I'm excited to be doing the first of what I hope will be an ongoing series of kind of partnership events with the Sustainable Communities Division. So my name is Naomi. Jenny introduced me and a bit about my background, but I really lead our programs to grow the market and the community of practice for EcoDistricts. So I am happy to be chatting with you today, and I'm going to dig into our standard for about 15 minutes, share a few case studies, and then want to make sure we have lots of time for Q&A at the end to learn about what projects you're working on and what else you're interested in that I may not have covered. So we are a nonprofit based in Portland, Oregon. We've been around for about 4 years as a national organization called EcoDistricts, but we started our work as a Portland-focused nonprofit in about 2009, developing an EcoDistricts approach and piloting it here, and then it quickly scaled and expanded and interest from other cities nationally and even increasingly internationally. And so our role and mission is to advance this new standard that we call EcoDistricts for urban and community development that really supports sustainable neighborhoods for everyone. And our programs are organized in 2 primary areas. So the first is really market transformation focused, so building a community of practice. And this is our certification program, accredited professional credential, training, professional development, our annual conference. And then we also have a program area where we do deeper place-based work with leading cities and districts through what we call our EcoDistricts Accelerator. So to give you a little bit of a sense of how we work. As I said, we're based in Portland. We're a team of about 10, and we've got staff also in Seattle and Atlanta at this point. And our work is all guided by this model for neighborhood development that we call EcoDistrict, so this new standard. And the idea is that it really puts equity and sustainability at the heart of all decisions and makes them fundamental. And so we developed this work over time, over the last 8 or 9 years, and in 2016, we launched what we call the EcoDistricts Protocol and EcoDistricts Certified, which evolved from a pilot program in Portland, a national pilot that we did with about 10 communities in partnership with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which I think of as kind of version 2 of the pilot, and then a pretty significant technical advisory committee with advisors from about 100 advisors from around the world. And so through those pilots and this advisory committee, we really defined for the first time what makes an eco-district. And that's the theory of change in the protocol that came out in 2016, and at the end of 2016, we followed it by a certification standard. Both of these documents are available on our website, and all of our work really hinges from theory and essence of how we define eco-districts. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit for you here. There's a lot of substance in it, so this is definitely kind of the high-level introduction, and I'll share a few case studies. And as Jenny mentioned, if you're interested in digging in deeper, go ahead and download those documents from our website, or I'd encourage you to attend our Foundations course the Friday before the APA conference in New Orleans. So some of this will probably look familiar to you as planners and practitioners who have been working in this space. Our framework and our definition of eco-districts is organized in these core areas. So for us, you start with 3 fundamental values, and these are equity, resilience, and climate protection. And I'll talk about each of them in the next few slides. And the idea is that these kind of visions, missions really signal intent and provide a framework for the implementation and the formation of the eco-district and why someone would want to organize or engage in an eco-district as a stakeholder. So those are the 3 fundamentals. In orange here, these what we call priority areas are probably pretty familiar looking at other rating systems or developing master plans. So prosperity, connectivity, resource restoration. I'm not going to go too deep into these except for highlight a couple that I think might be a little bit different to some of the themes in the industry. So one is that prosperity is really fundamental to this. So the idea of access to opportunity and innovation and economic development is fundamental to sustainability as well. There's a lot of work being done around health right now, health and well-being, and how strategies at the district scale can affect that. Connectivity, as we've defined it, is not just about transportation and physical access in the district, but also access to information. And then living infrastructure is primarily about habitat and ecosystem health, and resource restoration is primarily about energy, water, and air quality. And then what really distinguishes eco-districts is the purple process down below. And so when we started our work and we looked at it, rating systems and best practices in the industry, there's actually a good amount of work in the orange priority areas, some work around resilience, some around climate protection. But what we felt was missing was really an implementation process and framework for how you get to these great outcomes and how a diverse set of stakeholders works together to achieve the vision of an eco-district. So I think that's really how we distinguish our sort of formation is about collaboration and creating the governance structure for stakeholders to work together over time and really building that agreement and funding mechanism. And I'll talk more about each of these in the next few slides. This is just to kind of give you the overview. The roadmap is essentially the plan, but it's really focused on implementation. This is something that I think many of you do in your day jobs, and it's ideally built into a master planning process, but in some cases it stands alone as an eco-district roadmap. And then finally, performance. One of the things that is so often missing in community plans and processes is the transparency and accountability around tracking the commitments that were made in a planning process. And so we've really built in biannual performance reporting, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So this is the high level framework to give you a sense. So the imperatives. I think all three of these are probably pretty familiar to planners in this day and age. And so we did a lot of research from organizations who are experts in each of these areas around how they define it and how they scope them. And so our approach is not prescriptive. We recognize that each community should be defining equity, resilience, and climate protection based on the unique challenges and opportunities that they face and who the vulnerable populations are in their community. So we give some guidance, and there's a lot more detail in addition to this in our tools, but I wanted to give you a sense of how we ask communities to define them. So for example, for equity, we ask a community to think about who are the vulnerable populations in their district. So are these non-native English speakers? Are they recent immigrants? Are they people who can't access housing or can't access jobs, or have been historically pushed out of planning processes or gentrified neighborhoods? So who are those vulnerable populations that your community is going to affect? And we ask you to define a strategy for procedural equity, which is how you engage people, structural equity, which is how decisions are made, distributional equity, and cross-generational equity, which is who gets the benefits and burdens of investment in your particular neighborhood. So that's our framework for equity. Similarly, for resilience, we ask a community to define the stresses and shocks that they face. So shocks are floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, hopefully one-time rare events that we're seeing more and more throughout the world. And stresses are more pervasive challenges like unemployment, lack of access to clean water, and to define those through a social, economic, and environmental lens. And that informs their strategy. And then from a climate protection standpoint, we do say, this is the sort of clearest line in the sand, we say the climate protection commitment is to, at some point in the future, achieve carbon neutrality. And it doesn't have to be tomorrow, it doesn't have to be in 5 years, but through your intent, which is really what these imperatives are about, it's about your intent long-term in the community, you will move towards a carbon neutral future. And so we ask them to define a scope based on where thermal and electrical energy comes from, impact of solid waste and wastewater management, and then transportation. So this kind of gives you a sense of how, hopefully, we provide a bit of a framework, but then it's really up for the community to define it in the context of their specific conditions. I'm not going to go too deep into the priorities because I think these are probably more familiar to folks, except to say that these really come out in the roadmap phase of EcoDistricts, and we ask communities to have objectives in each of these areas, an indicator for each objective, and then at least one strategy, so that your objective is being measured with measurable data, and that you have a strategy that's actually able to move the needle on whatever that objective and metric are. So again, probably pretty familiar for some of your master planning or sustainability planning work. But implementation, as I mentioned, is I think one of the areas that distinguishes EcoDistricts. And so formation is, as I mentioned, really about developing the model for collaboration and leadership. How are decisions made? What is your governance structure? Are you creating a new nonprofit? Are you housed at an existing community development corporation or an existing university that's paying staff to deliver this work? How are you making sure that you have an ongoing process for engaging people as the demographics in the neighborhood change? So those are the questions that are addressed through formation, and the certification deliverable, or the sort of outcome of that, if you will, is what we call a declaration of cooperation. It's essentially an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. It's essentially an agreement between partners for how they're going to work together, how they're going to make decisions, what sorts of either in-kind or financial resources they're bringing, and agreement on kind of the vision, which comes to the imperatives. So that's the formation phase. It's really about that governance and collaboration model. The roadmap, as I mentioned, is guided by those 6 priorities in orange. And I will say in some cases, communities use language that resonates differently with them. And so as long as we can see alignment between the language that a community is using to define their priority areas, and we see that it comprehensively covers the EcoDistrict priorities, that's fine. So this is about kind of the process from those higher level priorities to specific objectives, to indicators to measure success, gathering data to establish a baseline and then a target. And then ultimately all of that is to inform the strategies, the kinds of projects and programs that people want to implement over time, which of course is where many communities and many discussions like to jump right to the strategies. What are we going to do? But the roadmap is really about setting up that holistic framework that looks broadly across the district, recognizing you're not going to implement all the strategies at once. So which are the ones that have the highest impact, for example. And we ask that it's very action oriented. So it also considers implementation funding, schedule, key partners. So the outcome here, the deliverable, is the roadmap, which is this action plan for achieving the priorities. And it includes specific strategies like bioswales, community solar, community garden, whatever it is, a district energy system, depending on the scale of the district. And then performance, as I mentioned, is a biennial report, and we give some sort of high-level criteria for what we want to see, but it is going to look different depending on the community. So it's tracking the progress of the roadmap, reporting on key metrics, improving on performance. So if you're not tracking in the right direction, what's your plan for corrective action, essentially? And then it's a way of sharing your experience and knowledge and actually making a public declaration and presentation about where you are and how your progress is going in this particular community. So it's going to look different whether it's a primarily business-focused district that might build this into their corporate sustainability reporting, for example, or a nonprofit might build the performance report into their annual report, or some communities might develop some sort of online portal or dashboard to track this information. So again, not prescriptive about what it looks like, but there's several key criteria that we want to see addressed every 2 years to maintain that certification. So the way we apply this, so all of that with the protocol was really the theory of change. And then our standard and certification is how you actually apply this in a community. So the communities that are formally recognized as an eco-district or a pending eco-district have registered, saying they're committed to this process. They develop their imperative commitments. They complete their formation process and develop their governance structure. They develop their roadmap, and then certification is really based on essentially launching your eco-district, those first 3 steps. And then it's maintained with these biennial performance reports. And the timeline is within about a year, they submit their imperative commitments, and then 2 years from that, they submit their formation and roadmap. And so we recognize this work takes a long time. And in some cases, it's not going to look super linear, right? The formation might come before the imperatives, or they might be done at the same time as the imperative commitment, for example. And that's fine. But these are sort of from our research on best practices and experience with the pilots, it follows loosely this process. And then, of course, the biennial reports are every 2 years from the time of certification. So how is it different? I've alluded to several of these things, but there's a number of ways. So as I mentioned, this focus on implementation and action is different than some of the other rating systems you might see or tools in the industry that are more about measuring prescriptive outcomes. It's very much about how do you do this work to get to these great outcomes that we all want to see. We've really tried to strike the balance between being rigorous and holistic, but flexible, because one of the big learnings from the pilot is that no community wants to take a prescribed approach and fit it to their community. They really want to take a more flexible framework that they can own and refine. And so we were very committed to that in developing our standard. It's applicable to a range of neighborhood types. So I often get the question of, oh, what neighborhood should be an eco-district? And, in reality, we tend to work in more urban communities or first-ring suburbs, but there are communities now that are more suburban developments, or even we just had a conversation the other day about an industrial eco-district. And so again, because we're not prescriptive, it could apply to a range of neighborhood types. Fundamentally, it's about a new way of working together, this model of governance and collaboration. And I think, again, from all of our research, that was really one of the things that was missing, right? There are a lot of great planning processes and wonderful sustainability plans and master plans and, beautiful high-performing neighborhoods, but they weren't necessarily done in a way that was true to the existing community or really collaborating between public, private, developer, institution, and community members. So this new model of working together and putting that at the front of this process is different. And because of that, and because of the transparency around reporting, it creates trust and community ownership and that accountability. And then finally, from our perspective and the way we do this work, and I mentioned it at the beginning, is that this is ultimately a community of practice. We're a small team. We are the EcoDistrict generalist experts, if you will, but this work is going to be successful because of place-based organizations or practitioners who are really committed and driving this work. And so we really want to create sort of that community of practice, that pool for all of the folks who are interested in and committed to this work to thrive. And part of our role is to celebrate it and recognize it. So it's not just a certification standard for us. All of the work that each of these projects pursuing certification do, part of what they agree to is making their documents and their process public so that we can share it and grow this community of practice and that they can be seen as leaders. So that's an important part of how we've designed the program. So we currently have 15 districts that are pursuing certification. We've probably worked with like 100 over the last decade or the last 8 years, but there's 15 that have said we're all in. And I think one of the things that's interesting about it is there's a wide geographic mix. You can see there's one project in Toronto, so the rest are in the US, but we've got one in Canada. They are a mix of projects that have been at this for a long time, like the Lloyd Eco District in Portland and the Capitol Hill Eco District in Seattle. So they're quite mature, but there was no certification standard for them to follow or pursue before. Some districts have been at it for a few years and are pretty far along, like the Pacific Beach Eco District in San Diego, the High Falls Eco District in Rochester. And then there's some that are brand new, like Little Haiti in Miami, and Metro Health is a big healthcare institution in Cleveland. And these newer districts have said, in a way that's been really exciting, they've said, oh, this is what we've been trying to do, but didn't really know how, trying to figure out a way to do something like this. And so they've learned about eco-districts and the framework, and they're like, okay, this is going to be helpful for us to really organize our efforts in a more structured way. So here's 12 of them, just to give you a sense. The other thing that's interesting is that they are, some of them are districts where, primarily the community-based eco-districts like Millvale and Little Haiti, where there's not major redevelopment happening. This is really a way for the community to take a proactive approach to sort of defining what they want in their community and creating a vision and some ownership over their neighborhood, and a model for collaboration, so that when new development pressures come into the neighborhood, they're ready to respond with their plan and their framework. That's very much been true in Little Haiti, which is facing tremendous development pressures in Miami. There's others that are, brownfield, greenfield developments, like East Harbor in Toronto is all new. It's the largest commercial redevelopment in Canada right now. So ground up development, new infrastructure, buildings, and a whole new community that'll be moving there. Similarly, Sun Valley Eco District, which I'll talk about in more detail, is a master planned affordable housing community. And then there's other projects like City Yards in Santa Monica or Metro Health in Cleveland, where there is a significant redevelopment happening, and the city or the healthcare institution have said, let's think about doing this differently in a way that's actually going to benefit the adjacent community. And what does that look like? So it gives you a sense of the range. So this diversity of projects, some are private sector led, either by a major developer or business community. So the Lloyd EcoDistrict and the Rhino Arts District, which is in Denver, are they're business improvement districts. And so they're, in some cases, smaller entities, but it's representing and driven by a business community. Whereas others are public agency led, like Sun Valley, like Santa Monica, where there's a major planning or redevelopment underway. And then others are really community led, like Millvale and Little Haiti. And so clearly what these neighborhoods look like vary significantly depending on that. And just for sort of broader context, given that we've been doing this work for a long time, we have engaged folks and worked with projects from around the world. So EcoDistricts is growing, picking up momentum, I think, relatively quickly. Some of these are projects that we've engaged deeply. We've done workshops with them. Others are places where we might have a contact or somebody's downloaded the protocol. And we are really increasingly seeing all over the world people downloading the protocol and reaching out to try to understand how this might fit and apply to their work. We've actually been doing a lot of work in South Africa, for example, and we have a few international APs. So it is really a growing community, and it's definitely expanding beyond the U.S., which is exciting for us. So with that, I have a few case studies to share to dig into a few of these projects. So Sun Valley, as I mentioned, is in Denver, Colorado. It's a neighborhood redevelopment project, but it's mostly a blank slate. There were only a couple of buildings there. It's about 100 acres, not a lot of existing residents, super low median income, and a very high unemployment rate. It's the lowest and most diverse, lowest income and most diverse neighborhood in Denver. So the Denver Housing Authority was working on this project, and they spun off a new organization called the Sun Valley EcoDistrict Trust, called SVED for short, in 2016. So the planning work had been underway, and the Denver Housing Authority realized that an independent nonprofit master developer could actually be more effective in delivering this work and access a different kind of funding if they were independent. And so SVED is the master developer. They provide development oversight, funding, major projects, and they're also starting to act as the community association. So really interesting model for this neighborhood. And they've actually got one of HUD's Choice Neighborhood grants. So they've had $30 million of federal money coming in, and they've been able to access a lot of other resources as well through this new model of the EcoDistrict Trust, which is a pretty interesting one to watch. So some of the early wins and the strategies they've pursued in our priority areas are the majority of the apartment units are public and affordable housing. They've developed a micro business incubator because employment was a big challenge. And actually this is housed at the community center, which is, I think, one of the first buildings they're developing in the district, so really kind of the hub. A lot of their work has been on complete street design and improving access to a nearby light rail station that was not very accessible for the community, but they know in order to get people to jobs, there needs to be better access to this light rail. The first thing they did was restoring the section of the South Platte River that's adjacent to the property because it was so contaminated, people couldn't even live there. So it started with a pretty major habitat and infrastructure restoration. And then they are planning to have an independent district energy system. And I think the study is currently underway that would be designed, developed, and operated presumably by an independent party, but it could also be owned and operated by the Sun Valley EcoDistrict Trust. So that work is underway. So pretty strong infrastructure, clearly, because it's a new master plan development is where they are. And a few of their lessons learned, the not surprising, anti-poverty and anti-displacement initiatives really need to be built into everything, the existing and future planning and development. And I think that's one thing they've done well because the fundamental mission for this community is to give a home and a community to these vulnerable populations. The connection to downtown Denver remains a challenge, but is essential to ensuring access to opportunities. And then, again, probably not surprising, it takes a lot of capacity to effectively deliver on an ambitious eco-district vision. So I think that could be a lesson learned from probably all of our projects. But their team they have a small board, and then there's currently, I think, just 2 staff that are at the Sun Valley Eco-District Trust. So it's a small team, but lots of other partners. So another very different district is the Lloyd District. And this is in Portland, Oregon. I would say probably the first eco-district. We've been working with them for the longest. And it's an existing business district just across the river from downtown Portland, primarily a professional working district, not many residents in the area. So they formed in 2010 as a 501c6, which is a business-focused nonprofit with seed funding from the Business Improvement District. So they already had a Business Improvement District, which gave them a model for working together. They're governed by a volunteer board of directors. They have 3 funded staff, and their motto is working better together. I think one of the things that's really unique about the Lloyd District is that their key stakeholders, who are really heavy hitters and significant players, totally understand the value of working together. From their Business Improvement District, they've had a Transportation Management Association. And so for them, shifting to a broader sustainability and equity focus to the eco-districts in some ways was a no-brainer. So their key stakeholders are the Business Improvement District, a major developer, Pacific Power, which is their headquarters. It's a regional utility. They're headquartered in the district. Major university that's not in the district, but has been doing a lot of work in supporting the Lloyd Eco District. Lloyd Center is a major mall that takes up multiple blocks. Metro is our regional government. And then there is actually a handful of retirement homes. So there's some programmatic work and an organization called Elders in Action. But you can see this list they're absolutely the power players in Portland and very much the power players in the Lloyd District. And so they bring significant resources and real estate and credibility. So their work, they've done a lot, and this is just a highlight. If you're interested, I'd encourage you to check out our website or go to their website because, again, they've been at this for many years. So one of the things that was interesting about the Lloyd District is that it didn't have a sense of place or a sense of community. There were sort of these 80s office buildings, not great public spaces, no sort of clear neighborhood brand or identity. And so the Eco District has started to develop murals and an intersection mural to provide some kind of recognizable places in the Lloyd District. They have been tremendous leaders with an organization called Right to Root, which is a homelessness group in Portland trying to address some of the challenges around lack of affordable housing. And so the Lloyd District worked to provide tiny houses, identify a parcel in the district, help partner with a university and a high school to develop houses that were actually powered by batteries. And I think there's 18 units now in the district through this Right to Root program that the Lloyd Eco District really brought to life. They have a Livable Lloyd campaign, similarly, to kind of bridge the generational gap in the Lloyd District. They've done a lot of work around electronic fleet vehicles. So they've got an electronic bike sharing program, and I believe are working on an electronic car program. They've got some great green streets, and they've actually developed a pollinator corridor so that there's a strategy for bees and pollination through this pretty established green street network. And then most of their work has been around energy. So they've had an energy action plan with pretty low-hanging fruit. They got a 12% energy reduction, again, without any major renovations in the last 5 years. They started a bulk purchasing program for LEDs for all the major businesses. They track and share all of their utility data. So similar to if you're familiar with the 2030 district. So they essentially pool and compare their energy usage to one another. And as a result, they're actually the only district in the city of Portland that complies with our new building energy disclosure policy. So that was kind of cool. And then probably the most significant from an infrastructure standpoint is a new project called Hassalo on Block Housing Development that has what they call NORM. It's the natural organic recycling machine, and it's a gray and black water treatment system for the district. So it's pretty notable. It's the largest in North America and has attracted a lot of interest and tours in the Lloyd District because of that. the Lloyd Eco District. So just a couple highlights from Lloyd's planning process to give you a sense of what some of these roadmaps look like and how they got to these strategies. We encourage eco districts, we require actually for those pursuing certification to provide context on what the city and regional goals are, think about potential within the district, establish the eco district goal, and then determine recommended strategies based on that context. And then similarly, from an investment standpoint, these are all very practical. Think about, what are the immediate short-term, mid-term strategies that can be achieved over time, and how are you going to implement these investments? Which ones come from the private sector? Which one are third party? Which ones are public? It's not to say that the 3-person staff in the Lloyd Eco District is actively implementing all of these projects, but they're advocating for and partnering with the city or other or private investors to kind of bring these strategies to life, right? So they hold sort of the bigger, cohesive, holistic vision, and they're involved with the implementation pieces, even if they're not the primary implementer. So one more case study. Well, I'll quickly do the lessons learned. So even in a district with this deep history of collaboration, it's challenging to get businesses commit to funding shared investments, right? That's not a traditional way of thinking. This has been a striking one for me, having worked with the Lloyd districts from the beginning, is that even in a business district, it's really all about creating community. And the Lloyd district has made this really intentional and thoughtful pivotal shift in the last few years to being not just about serving the business community, but to being about creating a community in this place that didn't have much of a community before. And it's changing because there is now there's been some residential development and there's now a residential population, but they've been really intentional about that, even though their board is still primarily business and property owners. And then Lloyd's really become a destination because of the eco district and its sustainability. I mean, we've literally heard of people applying to live in the new building who said we wanted to live in an eco district. So I think that's been really positive from certainly from a business and economic value perspective. Okay, the last one, Millvale, which I know you've probably all heard a little bit about because it received one of the APA awards and has been pretty highly celebrated. It is definitely one of my favorite eco districts, although I like them all. But it's notable, well, for a number of reasons. So it's an existing neighborhood, it's about 10 minutes from downtown Pittsburgh, but it's its own borough. It's a pretty small community, and the eco district is actually addressing the whole borough. And their work really evolved out of some resilience realities that they were dealing with in 2004 and 2007 when they had major flooding. And the community kind of got together and said, what are we going to do about this? You can see in the map that they're close to a river and they slope down to a river, so they're essentially in a floodplain. So they started their collaboration in 2007 after the second major flood. And they had started working together in an intentional way. And then they formed the EcoDistrict Collaborative in 2016 once our protocol and certification came out. The Borough of Millvale, so the municipality, serves as the backbone organization. So the staff was actually paid city staff. But there's 4 key founding organizations. So the Borough, the Community Library, the Millvale Community Development Corporation, and then New Sun Rising, which is a kind of innovation and entrepreneurship nonprofit that serves the community as well as a broader area. So they built a library really by volunteers, and it's still volunteer run. They developed a Launch Millvale program, so they've got all kinds of teen and workforce training program. So they did a community solar program and they had a teen solar fellowship that went along with it. They now have 3 community solar installations in their program or in their district. They developed the Gardens of Millvale, and their goal is that 90% of the food sold at local restaurants comes from the gardens, and they're pretty close to that. They didn't really have any bike or pedestrian infrastructure, and so a community committee developed a whole strategy. And I was there last fall, and there's great infrastructure now and on the streets. They have 4 huge bioswales. I've even heard they're some of the largest bioswales in the country that were designed by the community. Much of the work was done by the community, or there were apprentices to the construction firms that were installing the bioswales. And this was a huge priority because of all the flooding that they'd faced. And then they've got 3 solarized community buildings, which are, absolute demonstration sites. And I think one of the things that's been really, really cool and inspiring about Millvale is that the community loves Millvale. They love working together. They love the EcoDistrict. You can walk down the street and people know about the EcoDistrict and can point to these different projects that have happened as a result of it. And it's this sort of collaboration around sustainability and improving the community has been, I think, just really positive and inspiring. Another win that's not up here, but they did a whole, almost all the buildings on their main street have gone through some sort of energy efficiency retrofit. And so the main street has been improved, and all of those businesses have been engaged through the process as a result. So just a couple quick images from their report, and then I'll wrap up. So, and these are available online, the Millvale EcoDistrict Pivot. So they did their Pivot 1.0 in maybe 2010 or something. I can't remember. And then a couple years ago, they did the Pivot 2.0. And so you can see how they're defining their vision, their key strategies, potential projects, and the actions that they need to take. So really practical, visual, and this has gone out broadly to the community, and then they report out on these. And then similarly, they've got great visuals around their goals from an energy conservation. What do they want to increase? What do they want to decrease? So I think these are, from a sort of visual standpoint, that makes it pretty accessible to the community. I think they've got a great plan, and then they're able to use this as a framework for their reporting. So from their lessons learned, it's a small town, clearly with limited resources, but they worked so well together and collaborated so well, and were really able to pool resources and make big things happen in a small town. And I think because and they've said this, because their partners are so well connected, they could advance policies and programs more effectively. They say what they lack in resources, they make up for with agility and connectivity. The other one is start small. I think this is a lesson from all the EcoDistricts. Have a great low-hanging fruit that people can see and touch and engage with to see the value of working together in this way. And then Millvale's become a model for a lot of other communities in Pittsburgh that are now pursuing EcoDistricts. And we're actually talking about going there this fall to lead a workshop with 10 other communities that have seen the value of what's happening in Millvale and want to bring it to their own community. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple things and then hope to have some good Q&A. So you heard about the Foundations course that we're delivering in partnership with the Sustainable Communities Division. We would love to see you there. It's a full-day workshop on April 20th. You can register through the APA site or through our website. And then if you're interested in this, there's a number of opportunities to get involved. So we have a workshop every spring called the Incubator, where teams come together and get trained up and develop their strategy. You can certify a community. You can become an accredited professional. You can get help on a project. We often come and deliver workshops as part of kind of bigger planning processes. And then we have an annual conference. This year it's going to be in Minneapolis, October 17th and 18th. So a few points of information. And then I think that's it. And I would love to hear your thoughts and questions. And you're welcome to email me. My email address is on there.
Thanks, Naomi. That was so interesting. It's really good to hear, especially how your focus on implementation is sort of a distinguishing factor of the program, and then seeing how it was implemented in the case study that I thought was really useful. We do have one question, but if anyone else has questions, please do send them in using the chat box. But our first question is, how successful has EcoDistricts been in addressing the inevitable impacts of displacement and gentrification associated with improving the built environment, especially for existing neighborhoods?
That is an excellent question, and one that we often ask as well. I'd say in the last few years, we've asked the question much more bluntly of how can we make sure this strategy prevents displacement and gentrification. I don't think we have great examples of it yet because this work takes time. But I would say the newer communities like Little Haiti and Metro Health that are interested in this have said this is our anti-displacement and anti-gentrification strategy. And so I'd say for Little Haiti in particular, they're a great example. They were absolutely sensing, there were a couple specific parcels of land that the city of Miami put out for development proposals, and Little Haiti said, whoa, we've got to get our act together and have a clear plan and vision for this neighborhood before someone else comes in and gives it to us. So I think the value is a community can pick up this process or this framework and really own it, so that when outside, interests or pressures come in, they can say, here's what we want in our community, here's our plan, how are you going to fit into that or contribute to that? So I know, it's been empowering and feels like a helpful framework for communities to do that. And actually, Capitol Hill in Seattle, I think, has done a really good job. So Capitol Hill they're a community development corporation that primarily does affordable housing. They've been in Seattle for 40 years. And a lot of their work in the EcoDistrict is about preventing displacement. And so they've had a whole renter initiative as part of the EcoDistrict. They are very focused on celebrating the cultural history of the place. There's a strong history of LGBT communities in the area. And so they've actually developed a whole other imperative around culture and cultural history and how that's fundamental to their neighborhood. So there's definitely been a lot of new development that's happened in Capitol Hill, but they've been, I think they've done a pretty strong job at having a clear sort of set of criteria. And actually another example is the Pacific Beach EcoDistrict in San Diego, which developed a whole EcoDistrict checklist that developers have to essentially review and complete before the planning committee in Pacific Beach will even review or consider approving their plan. So there have been some kind of practical tools, I think, that have come out of this. And I think Millvale also is another good example of the community. There's a lot of development happening in Pittsburgh right now, and Millvale has totally taken and owned their future. So I wouldn't say we've got sort of great data yet, but a lot of the data points that are being tracked through that will be tracked through some of these performance reports are start to get at that and changes in demographics. But I think we do have those good sort of anecdotes and examples for sure. Hope that
great. Thank you.
Question. Yeah.
We do have another question, but before we do that, I just want to make sure everyone knows that we will be putting the recording of the webinar and the PDF of the slides up on the Sustainable Communities Division blog website, which is sustainableplanning.net, and those should be up in the next couple of days. So FYI. But the next question, Naomi, is: do you feel there is a way to apply this at a broader scale in a rural area, say a full township level?
Yes, I do. And Millvale, as I mentioned, is its own town. I think, again, because it's not prescriptive, if you kind of dig into the protocol and certification, it could apply in a much less dense area. It might be harder to achieve some of the, energy performance goals or reduced carbon emissions for sure. But yes, it could absolutely apply. And we are starting to look at some. I think one of the areas that that EcoDistricts is starting to get good uptake is in some of the Rust Belt cities. So Cleveland, Detroit, Rochester. I mentioned Pittsburgh, where there are. It's not rural, but there are huge sort of largely vacant parcels of land or areas that are now starting to be not yet redeveloped, but there's a planning process is going underway to think about what might happen here. So yeah, I think it could certainly be applied. And actually, I'd be happy to talk if the person who asked that question has a specific place in mind. I'd be happy to talk with them about it. I did just have a similar conversation about a bunch of sites in Detroit. So depending on how rural, I think it could be a good fit. I mean, the other project I didn't call out specifically, but that's super interesting, is the Atlanta airport is pursuing EcoDistricts. So it's a pretty unusual case, not to compare that to a rural township, but just to sort of make the point that the protocol really does apply broadly, regardless of the type of neighborhood.
Oh, interesting. An airport eco-district.
Yeah.
We have another question that has been sent in. What sort of feedback loops might be generated based on the performance reports? Is 2 years too long to wait to assess progress and implement changes in trajectory?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, some communities might report progress every year. I think, we arrived at the 2-year because we know that it takes a long time to do this work. So the roadmap is going to be 20, 30, it's going to have some projects that are implemented over a very long period of time. And so it's not realistic to think that every year there's going to be significant progress to report sort of on all metrics necessarily. So 2 years felt about right. But I think, I think it's a good question that one of the things the governance structure might consider is what sort of ongoing, community engagement processes there are once the roadmap's done, so that it doesn't feel like, there's a 2-year gap between the broader community, between completion of the roadmap and when the community hears anything. But that it's really, and that is one of the questions in the performance report, is what is the sort of ongoing engagement to ensure that the governance structure continues to be reflective. So yeah, I think it's an important question, and it's not one that's necessarily built into our requirements, but I think that certainly fits kind of the intent of EcoDistrict. And if a community, again, wanted to do an every 6-month performance report or 3 months, they'd be totally welcome to. And in terms of the kind of process and discussion that is generated by the performance report, I think it depends. I mean, I think in some cases a community might have a meeting to present the results. They might, send it out across their neighborhood. They might just put it on their website, and it does lead to a range of conversations.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Naomi. Those are all the questions we had. I did want to remind everyone that this webinar was eligible for 1 CM credit, so do make sure to log that if you need to do that. And again, this webinar will be up on sustainableplanning.net within the next couple of days. But thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next webinar. And thank you, Naomi.
My pleasure. Thank you all. Thanks, Jenny.